A doctor. 32 years of practice, a salary most people will never see in a lifetime. Retires at 67 with more money saved than 90% of the country. Dead broke by 73. Not because of a medical emergency, not because of a scam, not because of a bad investment, because the moment the paycheck stopped, the spending never did. Now contrast that with a school teacher, 40 years in the same district, never earned more than $55,000 a year. Dies at 81 with over $800,000 still in the bank and a paid-off home. Same country, same economy, completely different financial endings. The difference was never the income. It was always what happened after the last one. This video is not about retirement planning, index funds, or compound interest. You have seen those videos. You nodded along and kept living the same way. That is not an insult. That is human behavior. And human behavior is exactly what this is about. This is about the moment money stops arriving automatically. No more direct deposit, no more salary, no more paycheck on the 1st and the 15th. That moment exposes something years of earning kept perfectly hidden. The truth of your relationship with money, not what you know, not what you believe, but what you actually do unconsciously every single day. Most people think the danger is simple. I just need to save enough. But saving is not the problem. The problem is psychological, invisible, and far more dangerous. Here's the core idea. Most people do not have a savings problem. They have an identity problem. And when the income stops, that identity problem becomes a financial crisis. From your very first paycheck, you begin building an identity around that income. Brick by brick, year by year, the car, the neighborhood, the restaurants, the lifestyle, all of it quietly wired into who you believe you are. And when the paycheck disappears, the identity does not. The spending does not. Only the income does. Layer 1, the salary, self-image. Every consistent income creates a self-image floor, a minimum standard below which you will not allow yourself to fall, because falling below it would feel like failure, like regression, like losing. The problem is that most people, after decades of earning, have a floor far above what their savings can realistically sustain. They have normalized a level of lifestyle that required active, ongoing income to maintain. And normalization is not something you can undo with a conversation or a spreadsheet. Think about the psychological weight of downgrading your car after driving a certain class of vehicle for 15 years. Think about what it does to a person's sense of self when, for the first time in their adult life, they cannot afford to do the things they have always done. These are not small feelings. They are existential threats to identity. And the human response to an existential threat is not rational planning. It is denial, avoidance, and defense. In financial terms, those responses translate directly into continued spending that reality cannot support. Layer 2, the lifestyle inertia. Principle. In physics, inertia is the tendency of an object in motion to stay in motion. In personal finance, lifestyles. Inertia is the tendency of a spending pattern to continue long after the income that created it has disappeared. Most people assume that when their income stops, their spending will naturally adjust. This is one of the most dangerous assumptions in all of personal finance. Spending patterns do not self-correct. They continue by default until something forces a change, and by the time something forces a change, the damage is already done. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of behavioral design. Your spending habits were built by years of repetition, social reinforcement, and emotional association. They will not dissolve simply because a number on a paycheck stub changed. This explains why so many people burn through retirement savings in the first 5 years at the same rate they spent during their working years. They are not being reckless. They are simply being human. Layer 3, the status spending spiral. When people retire or lose a primary income source, they often experience what psychologists call a status anxiety event. The social structure of their life, previously organized around their career, title, and professional identity, suddenly disappears, and the unconscious response is often to spend more on visible signals of status, more on appearance, more on experiences, more on things that say, I am still the person I have always been. This is why the first year after retirement is one of the most financially dangerous years of a person's life, not because of emergencies, but because of celebration, compensation, and the quiet terror of needing to prove that nothing has changed. And that proof costs money, money that is no longer being replaced. Layer 4, the hidden cost of financial formlessness. When you have a job, your financial life has structure imposed from the outside. You know when money comes in, you know how much. That external rhythm does most of the financial management work for you. When that structure disappears, most people discover for the first time that they never actually developed the internal financial discipline to replace it. They were not managing their money. Their paycheck was managing it for them. Remove the paycheck, and you do not just lose income, You lose the entire financial architecture your life was built around. This is what advisors call the transition gap, the period immediately following regular income where financial decision-making becomes erratic, emotionally driven, and increasingly dangerous. Micro examples. Consider someone who has spent 30 years taking a family vacation every summer. The first summer after the last paycheck, they booked the trip anyway, not because they calculated they can afford it sustainably, but because not booking it would require explaining to themselves and their family why this year is different. That conversation is psychologically harder than the financial cost. Consider someone who, after leaving a high-paying job, begins renovating their home. This is more common than most financial studies acknowledge. There is something about the transition out of professional identity that drives people toward large, visible projects. The renovation is psychological displacement, and it is extraordinarily expensive. Consider the couple who both retire within the same year. For the first time in decades, they are both home all day. Shared space means shared boredom and shared spending. Dining out increases. Day trips multiply. Not because they are careless, but because filling unstructured time is, quietly, one of the most expensive lifestyle changes most retirees never anticipated. These are not extreme cases. These are ordinary, intelligent, hard-working people encountering the behavioral reality that no one warned them about. Rules and principles. Principle 1, separate your identity from your income before the income stops. This is the most important and most difficult principle. The work here is not financial, it is psychological. It requires asking yourself honestly which parts of your spending are genuinely giving your life meaning, and which parts are simply maintaining a version of yourself you were never fully conscious of constructing. When you can make that distinction, you become capable of making deliberate financial decisions rather than identity preservation decisions. Principle 2, build a post-income budget before you need one. Most people build their post-income budget reactively. They wait until the paychecks stop, then try to reverse engineer a sustainable lifestyle. By then, inertia has already taken hold. Build a projected post-income budget at least 3 to 5 years before your income ends. Live inside it experimentally before you're forced to. That practice is one of the most powerful financial preparations a person can make. Principle 3, replace external structure with internal architecture. When the rhythm of a paycheck disappears, you must replace it deliberately. Build your own financial calendar. Specific days for reviewing, spending, specific accounts for specific purposes, specific rules about what requires deliberate approval versus what happens automatically. Without structure, financial decisions default to emotion, and emotional financial decisions over time are almost always expensive. Principle 4, audit your status. Expenditures. Go through your spending and identify every category where a portion of the cost is not about the thing itself, but about what the thing signals. This is not a moral judgment. It is a financial analysis. Knowing how much you spend annually on status maintenance versus things you genuinely love gives you the power to decide what is worth keeping and what you're simply paying out of habit. Principle 5, treat savings as a business, not a piggy bank. After the final paycheck, your savings are no longer a safety net. They are your employer. Every business that wants to survive long-term must manage its cash flow with precision and intention. The psychological shift from saver to self-employed by your own capital changes how you make withdrawal decisions, how you think about large purchases, and how seriously you take the ongoing management of what you have. Principle 6, create a non-negotiable. Spending ceiling. Most budgets focus on what you should not spend. The more powerful architecture focuses on one number, a ceiling, the maximum you will allow yourself to spend in any given month, regardless of what is technically available. The ceiling is what prevents the emotional spending spirals that characterize the first years after income ends. It is not about restriction, it is about deliberate design. Principle 7, know the difference between permanent and temporary. One of the most common mistakes made after the last paycheck is treating temporary adjustments as permanent decisions. Someone draws down savings to cover an unusual expense and tells themselves it is a one-time event. It rarely is. The brain that made that decision once will find it easier to make again, until what felt like an exception becomes the pattern. Principle 8, invest in time structure as aggressively as financial structure. Unstructured time is one of the most reliable predictors of increased spending after income ends. Not because people are lazy, but because void and spending on experiences and things is one of the most socially acceptable ways to fill it. People who enter post-income life with robust, meaningful time structures consistently demonstrate lower levels of impulsive spending. Their identity is maintained by activity, not consumption. Principle 9, have the conversation. before you have the crisis. Nearly every financial crisis after a final paycheck is preceded by a period of silence where both partners quietly knew something was unsustainable but chose not to address it. The conversation about what your life will look like financially after income ends should happen years before it. Has to, regularly, with the same seriousness you would bring to a business planning meeting, because that is exactly what it is. Principle 10, know the exact number. Your life costs, not approximately, not generally, exactly. Most people, even financially sophisticated ones, do not know precisely what their life costs per month. They know roughly. But the gap between roughly and exactly is where financial lives go quietly wrong. After the final paycheck, every decision must be grounded in a clear, verified understanding of your actual baseline cost of living. That number is the foundation of everything. Numbers and reality check. Here is where the mathematics of behavior becomes undeniable. If your life costs $5,000 a month and you have $700,000 saved, you have roughly 11 and a half years of runway at face value. Factor in 3% annual inflation, and that runway erodes faster than the nominal number suggests. If your spending in the first 3 years runs at $6,000 a month instead of $5,000, which is extremely common given lifestyle inertia, your runway collapses by years, not months. A single percentage point of additional annual spending compounded over 2 decades does not reduce your savings by a few $1,000s. It can reduce it by a third. The numbers do not care about your intentions. They care about your behavior. Now consider healthcare. The average retiring couple in the United States can expect to spend over $300,000 on healthcare costs across their retirement. That is not optional spending. That is not identity-driven spending. That is a fixed cost that most people significantly underestimate. Layer the identity income trap on top of that. If you are spending at your working years level because your identity is not adjusted and simultaneously facing healthcare costs that were not fully accounted for, you're not running a slight deficit. You are running a structural collapse in slow motion, slow enough that most people do not recognize it until the halfway point has already passed. Here's the number that reframes everything. Studies consistently show that the majority of people who face serious financial hardship in their 60s and 70s were not poor during their working years. They were middle income, comfortable, sometimes well compensated. The problem was not earning. The problem was the gap between what they earned and what their identity required. And that gap, once income ended, became a canyon. Imagine your life on the current trajectory. Not the worst version, the honest default version. The one that plays out if you make no significant changes to how you relate to your money. You work, you earn, you spend to maintain who you are. You save what is left, which never feels like quite enough, but always feels like it will be when the time comes. Then one day, the time comes. The first months feel fine. Savings are intact. There's even a sense of freedom. You travel. A little. You renovate something. You spend on the things you always said you would do when you had time. Then, slowly, subtly, the numbers shift. Not dramatically at first, just moving in one direction. Decisions get harder. The gap between the life you're living and the life you can sustainably afford begins to widen. And with it comes something that savings alone cannot prepare you for. The quiet, corrosive weight of having worked your entire life only to find yourself financially constrained in the years you were supposed to be free. That is the default future. It does not require catastrophe. It only requires inertia. Now picture the alternative. You start the identity work before the income stops. You build the budget, test it, refine it. You invest in time structures that do not depend on spending. You have the conversations. You do the audits. You know your exact number and have structured your resources to sustain it. On the day of your final paycheck, you do not feel the ground shift because you have been standing on solid ground for years. The transition is not a fall. It is a completion. The money does not run out because it was never being spent unconsciously. It was always being spent on purpose. That future is not a fantasy. It is not reserved for the wealthy. It is available to anyone willing to do the behavioral work before the financial crisis forces it. Most people spend their entire working lives getting better at earning money. They develop skills, build experience, climb whatever ladders in front of them. But almost no one spends comparable energy getting better at the one financial transition that will determine the quality of the last quarter of their life. The last paycheck is not just a financial event. It is a revelation. It reveals exactly what kind of relationship you have with money when money is no longer automatically arriving. It reveals whether your spending was driven by choice or by identity, whether your lifestyle was designed or defaulted, whether you built a financial life or simply inhabited one that the paycheck built for you. The painful truth is that most people only discover those answers when it is too late, when the savings are already depleted, when the options are already narrowed. But you are watching this video. which means you still have time. The work of financial security is not primarily mathematical, it is behavioral. It is the deep, ongoing practice of understanding not just what your money does, but what your money means to you, why you spend what you spend, who you believe you are when you spend it, and whether the version of yourself that your spending maintains is the version you consciously chose. The final paycheck will come for everyone. The only question is whether you will be ready. Not ready in the sense of having the right account balance, ready in the sense of having already made peace with the identity question, already built a life whose value is not measured by what it costs to maintain. Because in the end, people are not undone by market crashes or bad luck alone. They are undone, quietly and slowly, by the cost of never knowing themselves,